Okay, shall we start off? Shalini, can I start
Yes,
off?
ma'am.
Okay. Very good afternoon to each of you again. Today, as we are winding up the session on the medical laws, this session we will be talking on some of the laws, on contemporary medical issues. And most importantly, we will also try to look into the laws if, those situations where we can protect our medical workers, because the pandemic has made it all the more obvious, that we can no longer deny them protection to our frontline workers, protection to our medical workers, because the instances of vandalism, the instances of medical professionals being attacked, of our frontline workers being shoot out of their houses, of social discrimination, and all of that has become all the more obvious. And these are obnoxious facts that we really need to counter as a society, and perhaps it would be the best to begin with having a legislation. And when I say that, I don't mean to intend, or I don't mean to pass it off saying that we don't have any legislations. We do have legislations. But like we've already discussed in the previous sessions also, that health, the main issues as to, one of the main challenging factors as to why our health laws not as strong as what they could be in India is because of the simple fact, the way the constitutional framework has been laid out, where, health has been made a concurrent subject, and the central government is also reluctant to step into the domain of these areas where the state can themselves legislate laws. And if you if you go become at the doors of the Supreme Court is also going to interpret the constitutional framework as the way it ought to be. So that is where there is a lot of there are lots of nuances in the laws, there are lots of dynamics that are involved as well. So we will begin off, looking at three basic legislations that I personally feel is very essential, because, like I've already said, and like we already know, and we have been reading in the newspapers, that the COVID pandemic has brought to light many inconvenient truths, many of the ugly truths that we have been able to brush aside for such a long time. Today we are in a position where we can no longer oversee that, and maybe perhaps it is time that we also revise some of our legislations so that they're more contemporary, so that they're more applicable, so that they're more effective. Because in India we have excellent policies on paper, but there's always something that lacks when it comes to the the way we implement it. Maybe because we don't have adequate amount of backup plans, or maybe because we don't have an effective system of checks and balance. Sometimes the follow up generally also suffers a setback, because when we legislate laws, there's a lot of hue and cry, but how much are we able to sustain that? That becomes a very challenging question. And so what is important is that we need to have a system where we are able to not just introduce the laws, but also we also need to have backups. We also need to ensure that we have adequate measures of checks and balances, where we can also have follow-ups as well. So the first, we can go to the next slide, please. The first piece of legislation that I want to talk about, which I am sure a lot of us already have an idea about, is the transplantation of human, or it's a Transplantation of Human Organs Act, which was legislated in the year 1994. And the reason why I particularly wanted to talk about this law, and okay, before I go into the discussions, I want to put a disclaimer across that this, since this is not a proper classroom teaching in the strict sense, so I will not be dwelling into sections, or I will not be dwelling in minute details of the legislations. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you an overview of what the legislation is, and why I personally feel that it is important to kind of maybe bring about some kind of an amendment to make it more contemporary, in order to counter the exigencies that we are facing in today's time. All right, so that is what I intend to do when I discuss certain pieces of legislation, because any one of us can download the Bear Act and can just have a look at it, because the laws as I read it is the same as is provided in the Bear Act. So anyways, coming back to the Transplantation of Human Organ Act of 1994, the purpose of having this legislation was to streamline organ donation and transplantation activities, because we it's not just a problem that India is facing per se, but it is a global problem, where the victims of organ, transplantation, or, organ theft, if I can use that term, are generally people from the third world countries where there is a lot of economic scarcity, where financial positions of people are really, have really gone for a toss, where, a lot of women, if you see, most of the victims that we see who are victims of organ donations and, organ transplantation racket are also women who belong to the, marginalized sections of the society, where, the husbands are into heavy drinking, or, the husbands are into gambling, or, it's the burden, the financial burden falls on the woman. So for her, it becomes a very easy option, may not be as easy as we understand, but easy in the sense of, it could be more convenient for her to sign up for an organ donation, whereby her consent may be what we understood yesterday when we talked about, the tax consent, where she just nods her head in an implied manner, not understanding repercussions of organ transplantation. Because when we talk about organ transplantation, it is not just about, getting your kidneys out and giving it to the other person, but it also needs a lot of medical checkup. It also needs a lot of care that a donor needs to, be given. But these women, these victims generally of, organ transplantations, are persons who don't even know the repercussions of, what she or he is getting into. So that's the reason why, the parliament felt that we need to have a law that's going to regulate and that's going to streamline. Because at the end of the day, organ transplantation is per se not a crime, but it is how it is carried out that makes it a crime, or that makes it a valid, medical procedure, right? So the objective of the act was to streamline organ donation and transplantation. And this act is significant in the sense of, the act accepted brain death as a form of death and made the sale of organs a punishable offense, which means that if you are, donating your organ, or if there is a medical practitioner who is, who brings around an organ donor, right? And if it is for commercial purpose, if it is for sale, then it is a cognizable punishment. It is a cognizable offense, right? Now, what happens is, the interesting part of this, the interesting, part of this legislation is that it accepts brain death. Now, when we talk about organ, before I go into what is brain death, I just want to quickly talk about, what is, whenever we talk about organ, the organ transplantation or organ rackets, the first thing that always comes to our mind is that, we're always talking about it in terms of, kidney. फिर ऑलवेज जब भी आप ऑर्गन ट्रांसप्लांट के बारे में पढ़ोगे या जब भी आप देखोगे, हमेशा हमें ये लगता है कि हमेशा ये ज़्यादातर ये किडनी ट्रांसप्लांट होते हैं. लेकिन अगर आप देखोगे ऑर्गन ट्रांसप्लांटेशंस, देन वो इट्स ऑल्सो पेनक्रियाटिक ट्रांसप्लांटेशंस भी होते हैं, पेनक्रीज भी होते हैं, लिवर भी होता है, एंड इवन आई, donations also are also, eye transplantations are also done. But if you look at this, transplantation of human organ, it doesn't specifically mention, or it doesn't exclusively, talk about what are the organs that, can be transplanted or what are not. And there was a piece of, there was an article that I've read quite a while back, and I can't really recall the author, but it was quite interestingly written that जब भी आप eye donation या whenever we talk about the organ eye, it says that it doesn't come strictly under the organ transplantation, because when you talk about organ transplantation for the purpose of this act in 1994, it talks about organ transplantation that is to be made where the donor is brain dead. But when we talk about eye donation, or when you talk about transplantation of eyes, it can also be done on a person who's dead, natural death, right? So that was one point that I thought was quite interesting. So whenever we talk about organ transplantation, आप ये मान के चलिएगा कि it's not only kidneys, but it is also the liver and also the pancreas, and and when we talk about, the Organ Transplantation Act, we're talking about brain death, which means that we're talking about a cadaver transplantation. That means, where this person has been declared brain dead, and this declaration has to be, the certification has to be made within 6 hours, and, it has to be made by doctors. And these doctors, so you have two groups of doctors. One is the doctor who is actually supervising, or who under whose medical supervision this patient is, and you have another group of doctors who are to be appointed by the state authorities, who are going to go and certify that the patient is actually brain dead. That means कहने का ये मतलब होता है, जब आप किसी patient को brain dead declare कर देते हो, उनके chances to come back to life is is nil. And also, if let's say if at all there is a miracle that happens, the quality of life that this person is going to have is not going to be normal. But when you talk about brain death, it's that the chances of this person coming back to life is nil. And also he or she, the patient, is kept alive by the use of certain medical techniques like a ventilator and all of those procedures that are involved. All right. So whenever we talk about the human transplantation of human organ act, what is interesting is that we're talking about it's a living donation. That means the person is declared brain dead, but he's not dead as of yet. And the transplantation is supposed to happen between, so you have these first relatives, and you also have relatives who, sorry, you have the first relatives, and you also have a donee who may not be relatives, right? So सबसे पहले अगर आप देखोगे, who are the people who can donate? They are the first relatives. First relatives के अंदर हमारे category में, they are, the law clearly mentions that it is the victim's father, mother, brother, sister, blood relatives. It could be a spouse or even the grandparents. So initially grandparents were not brought about in the ambit, लेकिन आज के ज़माने में even grandparents also come in the first line of living donees. All right, living donors and living donees and recipients. Now there is a second category जहाँ पे जिनको आप organ donate kar sakte ho, or these are the recipient and the donors. And it could be, and what the law actually says is that ye jo donor ye jo organ donation chal raha hai na, it should be based on love and affection, and some kind of a relationship that's based on fondness. So because what the law is trying to say is that this organ donation, ye jo whole ye jo procedure hai na, it should not be anything to do with money, profit making. Because it is, when you talk about organ donation, it is about, it's not just your life, that it's not just the donor's life that's going to improve. The donor's life is going to improve because he needs kidney, he needs liver, so आप उनको देखिए, आप उनका life elongate कर रहे हो. But the donor's life also gets affected. The quality of life may change, and the kind of medical assistance that he or she needs also could become invariably increased. So it is something, it's a huge risk. In all honesty, when you are donating your organs, it's a huge risk that you're undertaking, right? It is. And there have been, and I personally know of a family friend where the younger, they had just they were so this uncle and auntie, they had 4 children, and they just had one daughter. So the eldest son needed kidney transplantation, and the match was with the only sister that he had, and she donated her kidney, right? And what happened was the brother, who was the donee, did not survive the operation, and he passed away in less than 72 hours of the kidney transplantation that happened. And in less than 2 years, the sister, who was a donee, also passed away, leaving behind a 5-year-old son. And this was almost 10 years back. So what I'm trying to say is that this is the reason why the act is very clear when it says that organ donation should not be for economic purpose, should not be for financial gain, because it's a huge risk. And such kind of risk are to be taken, ideally to be taken by relatives. And when you take such, and when you include the relatives as the ideal donor and donee, that is when we can conveniently push aside the aspect of there being any kind of commercial gain. But there have been also instances where the donor is, where the donee is not, sorry, when the when the donor is not able, the patient is not able to receive any kind of organ donation from a relative, close relative, for whatever reasons. So what do we do then? Is it fair to deny this person from receiving any kind of receiving the particular organ that he needs for survival? So there is a provision that has been made in the act where the recipient and the donor can be allowed, will be allowed to donate the kidney or to donate the liver or the pancreas, but you need to seek a special permission, and this special permission needs to be given to you by the authorization committee. So the Transplantation of Human Organ Act has brought about, it has set up two authorities, and one of the authorities called the Authorization Authority, who is going to regulate the process of the entire who's going to regulate the process of the recipient, the entire process of the organ donation that's there. And it is also the authorization committee who's also going to give you a certification. They're also going to cross check what is the purpose behind the donor and the donee. Why is the donor wanting to donate his organ to the donee? So the authorization committee is also going to sit and cross check. They're also going to see that whether the match is good, whether the particular donor A and particular donor B, whether the match is as required in the medical standard practice, and what is the purpose. So इनके में especially the donor जो है उनको बुला के they'll also have an interview. They'll also try to see whether this person's consent has been a consent that has been received, whether it's a free and a fair consent, whether there has been any undue influence, whether there is any financial gain that has been, whether the donation is based on financial, it's exclusively based on financial gains or not. So ये सब जो factors होते हैं ना, इन सबको जांच करने के लिए आपके authorization committee क्या करेंगे, वो donor को भी बुलाएंगे, and they will have an interview kind of a thing to assess what is the reality, or to kind of get an idea as to why वो donation उनको करना होता है. And it is only when the authorization committee is satisfied कि ये जो donor and donee जो है ना, ये relatives नहीं है, लेकिन the donor is wanting to donate it for whatever, for bona fide reasons, it's only then एक certification दिया जाएगा. ठीक है, जब ये certification दिया जाएगा ना, इसको ज़्यादातर ये authorization committee, they're appointed by the state governments, right? ये इनको mail किया जाता है to the hospital concerned, right? And in case if the authorization committee is not satisfied that there are bona fide factors as to why this donation is to be made, then they can even reject the claim. They can even reject the request for the permission to be granted. फिर आप दूसरी तरफ आ जाइएगा. If you look at this slide, it talks about appropriate authority. ये जो appropriate authority है, these are also appointed by the state government, and the appropriate authority जो है ना, they will also be giving you the. So the purpose is to regulate the removal, the storage, and the transplantation of human organs. That means the appropriate authority will also be giving you the license. They are also the license granting authority. जो एक hospital को authority दिया जाएगा कि yes, you can carry out the procedure of human organ transplantation. Because जब आप organ transplantation के बारे में बात करते हो, it's a major, super major operation. So you need to have basic techniques. You need to have adequate number of professionals who are there, even the storage of the human organs that are being removed and that are to be transplanted. So there's a procedure that is required. ये जो procedure है ना, ये इस act में नहीं दिया जाएगा, because that is it comes under pure medical science, which people like you and I may not understand. But generally ये जो law है ना, ये क्या कर रहा है कि हमें एक based general idea दे रहा है कि whenever you talk about organ transplantation, it should be number one between relatives of the first relative जो list दिया गया, माँ, बेटी, father, brother, and grandparents also, son, daughter. And अगर in first relatives में से अगर आपका match नहीं हो पा रहा for the donor, then you can seek for a donee, right? लेकिन आपको उस प्रकार आपको एक सर्टिफिकेशन लेना चाहिए होता है जो आपको ऑथराइजेशन कमिटी दिया जाएगा. Now there are many tests that need to be conducted, and वो जो blood test वगैरह, culture test, and all of those tests that are involved, that I will not talk about, because like I said, it's pure medical science जो हमें ज़्यादा इतना नहीं समझ में आता. लेकिन ये जो सारा टेस्ट होते हैं ना, इनको लॉ ये कहता है कि ये जो सारा टेस्ट आप देख रहे हो, to in order to see that the match between the donor and donee is as per the requirements, the standard, the test will be done from laboratories which have been accredited with National Accreditation Board for Laboratories. That means that these laboratories have to be recognized by the government. And the reason why the law insists on these labs, this test to be conducted in government approved labs, is because there will be no tampering of the test, because so that it's fair. Okay? Now, this is what the law is about, the transplantation of human organ, a very generic overview. And the reason why I want to talk about this, the reason why I talked about this is, agar aap isko pit it against the pandemic, there have been so many newspaper reports, we know that, when we looked at the exodus of the migrants, it was heart-wrenching, and now there are so many people who have lost out on their jobs. So what do we do? That means poverty has stricken. There are so many people who have, who have no means of sustenance. And in all of this wild, there has been, the cases of trafficking in humans, the trafficking in child labor, domestic violence, trafficking in trafficking of human organs, trafficking of animals also have gone up so high. So we have a legislation that forbids the transplantation of human organs for economic gains. But in today's time, transplantation, trafficking of human organs has become one of the most challenging issues that the pandemic has posed on us. So it is important to understand the law. And what is it that we can do to make it more effective? I think, that is one thing that we can talk about once we get into the Q&A and the discussion aspect, right? So just hang on to that idea that हमारे पास कानून already had 1994. Then why is it that we are having? That means there is something that's lacking. Somewhere there is a lot of slip between the lip and the cup, which is why pandemic strikes, total lockdown, yet the instances of human trafficking, or the instances of trafficking human organs rather, has really shot up. How is this happening? That means, are there medical, that means our appropriate authority, are there the hospitals and clinics that are operating without getting license from appropriate authority? And the answer is yes. So what do we need to do to strengthen the procedure that are involved in granting of licenses? And one of the answers that that comes to my mind, and time and again, I'm sorry if I sound repetitive, is that the clinical establishment, agar wo hum law ka, कानून को हम लागू करते हैं, so every establishment will necessarily have to have a basic minimum standard of techniques and facilities that are required. And when you don't have a law that makes it mandatory for you to have those minimum specifics, and you are free to set up a clinic, we're just exposing ourselves to the dangers of violating provisions like although we have legislations like Transplantation of Human Organ Act, there is a racket, there's a very, very strong racket, and it's not just small time practitioners who are involved, and it's not just the medical persons that we can blame. We are also to be blamed to a large extent, because we have a very important role to play, because we need to literate, we need to help people to understand that there is there is a legislation that forbids human transplantation of organs for economic purpose, and it's a non-cognizable offense. But having said that, sometimes the punishment is also not that it's not that um, strict, because if you look at it, it's like, if you look at section 18, after this session I would request all of you to go and look at the sections of the legislation. Like, if you look at section number 18, it says that the punishment could lead to imprisonment of 5 years or with 50,000 rupees fine. That's a very, very nominal amount. The imprisonment of 5 years, it doesn't even talk about rigorous imprisonment. But law ye kehta hai ki agar if you're guilty and if you're charged under the Transplantation of Human Organs Act of 1994, punishment is 5 years punishment, या तो आपको 50,000 रुपया जुर्माना भरना पड़ेगा, या दोनों होगा. And अगर आपका and if you're a doctor who's guilty of this, then what you're going to do is your license may be cancelled for 2 years in the first instance, and if it's a repeated offense, then your license can be suspended forever, permanent suspension of license. But when we talk of license suspensions and all of that, with due respect to the authorities that we have, it's very difficult to, how many times, how many instances do we know where a doctor's license have been cancelled? Because it's you are members in the commissions or in the erstwhile medical council also with doctors, so it becomes very, very difficult also to take an action against one of the members of the fraternity, for that matter. So we need to have an independent system where we can actually take care of this kind of offenses that are being created, the offenses that are being committed, and we need to have a very transparent system of reporting as well. And when we talk about section number 18, it talks that 5 years of imprisonment and 50,000 rupees fine also could, it's not just to doctors, but it also could mean to any person who could act as a middleman in getting a donee, and enticing the person for money. But again, the question is, where does the buck stop? Because now with COVID situations where people are losing on their source to livelihood, agar if you go to a woman who needs to feed 5 children, right, and where her husband, or let's say a widow who needs to feed 5 children, and you lure her and say, explain her that you can still survive with 1 kidney, that's all right, you will still live a normal life, but I'm going to give you 50,000 rupees. 50,000 rupees would seem to be a good amount for a woman who has no source of livelihood. And the kind of situations that we are in right now, it's the main crux of the problem lies in the fact that, of poverty, right? And that is something that you will see that, there's an anthropologist also, Lawrence Cohen, who he's from he's from America, and he carried out a detailed study of human transplantation, organ donation and organ record and all of that in India. And what he's finding was, he said that most of these organ donors are women who do it for money because they are deeply in debt. We talk about microfinancing and all of that. Also, ठीक है, आप microfinancing के बारे में बात कर रहे हो, it's easy to take loans. If loans, repayment of loans, and if loan taking was so easy, why would we have so many farmers who commit suicide? If we talk about, microfinancing, if it SHGs, if they were as effective to tackle the issues of poverty, I don't think we would have had so many people who are, left on the streets begging for food, and what happens is, when we go to the interiors of India, and this is something that's very common, gambling and alcoholism is two of the main problems that, creates a lot of issues for in the rural household, and so these are factors that kind of lure people into getting into this kind of, organ donations. And they're not even aware that it's a crime. They're really not aware that it's a crime, and they are not just victims because of poverty, but they're also victims of for life, because they can't even afford the kind of medical checkup, the kind of nutrition that they need to intake, right? So we need to really vamp up, we need to really make our laws more up to date, and we need to also look at it not just from a social point, not just from a medical point of view, but also from a social point of view, and I want you all to look at section number 19 also, because it deals with, communicate, it makes it important to, the law makes it obligatory for the it kind of creates a right in the donee to also be informed. There should be an informed consent also to effectively communicate the repercussions of the organ donation, right? That is also given in section number 19. And section 21 also talks about, offenses when they are committed by companies. So it's not just one individual that we're talking about under, your Human Transplantation Act, Organ Act, but we're also talking about companies. And the reason why, again, what I'm trying to say is, I think I just missed out on telling you this, that, one of the first instances of the cadaver donor was a kidney transplant that was conducted in, Bombay in 1965. And, later on, when there was a study, there was a lot of research that was done, and there was a lot of interview that was conducted, held with this donor. And then he said, there are lots of, and he said that, well, for confidentiality reasons, and since we are on record, I will not give you the name of the donor, but what he said was, in the multiple interviews that he gave, was that he said, it has created so much of it has not made it easy at all for him, because of the fact that, it's not just medical implications, but also, social problems that have created, because one, there are lots of technical difficulties way back in the 1960s, because it includes your immunology also gets compromised, in you're more prone to infections, there's engrafting and all of those, other medical terminologies and medical complications that are involved. So one, as a person medically, his lifestyle was affected to a large extent. And more so, he also said, there are lots of social problems that are created because, to a large extent, he was also tagged as someone who was a neo-cannibalism. That neo-cannibalism का aspect जो था ना, वो आया था. तो वो कहता है कि हर जगह मैं जाता था, सब मुझे ऐसे घूर के देखते थे कि, oh, what did you do? तुमने पैसा के लिए तुमने अपना किडनी जाके donate किया हुआ. But that may not have been the reason, So there's a lot of social construct that is important when we talk about medical laws. And all the more with pandemic right now that we all are reeling under, we all are having difficult time. I'm having a difficult time. You're having a difficult time. But the way the difficulties that we are facing today is very different from the difficulties that persons, other persons who are less privileged than us are facing. And especially when it comes to healthcare laws, because if I'm unwell, or let's say if I have a headache, I can, just go and get myself a tablet of paracetamol. But that is not even available to persons who are in the rural sector or in the interiors, or who don't have people to attend to, right? So all of these social issues, which has kind of been this, which has been made obvious by the pandemic, we will discuss it in a short while, in some time. All right. Yeah, I think that is with the organ Transplantation of Human Organs Act, and I would recommend you all download the act and go through it, and you will see that it's a very simplified legislation, but we do have an act. And this is why, we try to curb human, racket in human organs, but it's a very, very thriving business. In as ugly as it may sound, but it's a thriving business, and we need to do something about it, because the victims now with the pandemic COVID lockdown, the victims, there are the instances are much more higher, and because we don't have really effective rules in reporting, and we are not too great with data recordings and reportings and transparency in all of these procedures. It's sad. It's a sad state of affair that we are in. So I think we can go to the next point, please. Yeah, so as we are moving up the slide, so the takeaway from the Transplantation of Human Organs Act is that it's an act which creates for the authority of removal of human organs. It also provides for regulation of hospitals, and it also provides for registration of hospitals who are permitted to conduct human transplantations of organs. And it also lays down offenses and penalties, and it recognizes the illegal transplantation of human organs as a non-cognizable offense, right? So which means you can be arrested without an arrest warrant. And the punishment is minimum punishment could go up to 5 years and a fine of rupees 50,000 or both. And if you're a doctor, then if it's a first time offense, apart from the rigorous imprisonment and all of that, your license can be cancelled for 2 years. And if it's a case of repeated offense, then your license can be cancelled off permanently. So that is the takeaway from the act. Now, the other legislation that I want to talk about is on the sales of, in the Drugs and Cosmetics Act of 1940. This is an old act which was there, even before India gained its independence. And if you look at the provisions of this act, it may be divided. It can be, for convenience sake, we can divide it into 4 main divisions, where the act talks about the import of medicines, the import of drugs and cosmetics, the manufacturing of drugs and cosmetics, the sales, and also the labeling and packaging. Because the reason why I want to talk about this is, again, because this is also quite relevant for us now, because just yesterday also there have been reports of remdesivir, this antibiotic which is supposedly the best that is being administered to patients who are affected with COVID pneumonia, right? There have been instances. There have been a lot of reporting also that there are fake medicines that are being sold in the market, fake medicines that are being administered to patients. So that this fake selling of fake drugs and medicines are so we have legislation that is there which can take care of it. But however, having said that, like I said, when there is a law, there is always whenever there is an action, there's an equal and opposite reaction, like Newton quite clearly says that. So whenever you have a law, also you have a counter act to that. And these persons who are indulging in all of these things are many times very, very smart indeed. So when we talk about so if you look at the objective of the Drugs and Cosmetics Act, it is to import, it is to regulate. So the regulation is very, very important. And the thing is, whenever we want to regulate a certain activity, we need to have registration also. So it is important that that we need to have a very strong system of maintaining records, maintaining of registration procedures. And at one point in time, all this was very difficult because the paperwork was too bulky. And for those of us who know about the socio-economic crimes also, kya hota hai ki, there's always something called fast money. So corruption breeds and makes things really very difficult, especially for the common man. But now, with the ease of doing business, where we're talking about IT and e-governance and all of that, now with the presence of a single window system, things are becoming more transparent, because there is an obligation also that has been imposed by the government, that these companies, or these manufacturers, not just of drugs or cosmetics, but manufacturers of goods at large, they're also supposed to make it public, bring their information in public domain as to those point of contacts and the nature of the business and things like that. But of course, we have the protection that we need to grant on them, because the patents rights also apply, so the IPR. But because I wouldn't talk about the IPR and all of that, because that would be too far-fetched from what we are discussing. but we need to, all of these laws, they work in tandem with one another. So when we talk about the Drugs and Cosmetic Act also, because there were questions that I receive quite a bit, when people say that, don't we have a, we just have a drug controller, don't we have a law? We do have a law, and we do have the drug controller also, right? And the drug controller's office also works very closely with the food safety and security authorities, because these are all correlated with one another. Because what is a drug? Like I said, the Drug and Cosmetic Act, it doesn't define, the drug, the word drug is not being defined for us, but it is any substance that can be used for therapeutic or for medicinal purpose. And in that sense, it also becomes important for us to kind of correlate it to the NDPS Act, because जब भी हम NDPS Act के बारे में बात करते हैं, narcotic drug, psychotropic substance, because like for example, there are substances or there are drugs, if I can, if we use it in a very generic form, which are also used for medicinal purpose, and sometimes they're also misused, right? And which, rather than doing good, becomes more harmful. So we do have a, an act which is there to regulate the import, the manufacturing, the distribution, and sales of drugs and cosmetics, right? And what is very, very important is also that, we need to understand that labeling is very important today. We usually say, generally, hum kya bolte hain ki never judge a book by its cover. But if that was the truth, why would we have such, why would we have such attractive packaging today? Because one thing that attracts is visual, right? And in today's time also, we have legislations, or we have requirements, the mandate that, every manufacturer is supposed to put down the customer care number, is also supposed to put down the business address, is also supposed to put down the composition of what we are, consuming. So to make it simpler, and to drive the point across, like for example, if I want to go and take a packet of biscuits, so the first thing that I would also see, apart from the name of the biscuits and all of that, is whether there's a green dot, or there's a red dot, or there's a brown dot. Because for a person like me who's very strongly allergic to eggs, the first thing I would see is to ensure that the biscuit that I'm going to consume is purely vegetarian. So that also applies when we talk about drugs and cosmetics, because all of us are different, anatomically, physiologically, we all are different. So what works for one may not work for the other, and that is where the labeling and packaging becomes very, very important. All right. And there are schemes of and so the labeling and packaging aspect, it would be very interesting if we can talk about trademarks, but we will not do that. But when we talk about labeling and packaging, we do have, we can't kind of compartmentalize, this act also kind of compartmentalize the drugs into different, kind of compartmentalizes it, so it's easier for us to also find out whether the drug is being misbranded, whether the drug has been uh, packaged in a way that could be deceiving to the public. And when we also talk about the sales, because sales of drugs will be, it's directly correlative to the way it's been labeled and to the way it's packaged. Trust me, this is something that I'm not saying on my own, but this is what I've gathered from the conversations that I've had with friends who are in the human resource managements with some of the big pharmaceutical industries. So there's a lot of investments that are also done in the way the packaging and the labeling is also done, especially the labeling that is done, because especially when we go to purchase, whenever we make a purchase of not just drugs but cosmetics also, what catches our eye is what we are bound to pick up from the shelves, right? So I think we can go on to the next slide, because I think we should just know what is misbranding of drugs and the others alike. Yeah, we can go to the next slide, please. Yeah, so the act clearly compartmentalizes drugs into misbranded drugs, adulterated drugs, and also it talks about spurious drugs. And so what is important is that whenever we talk about drugs, so this is also not just for the MRs or just for the manufacturers, but we also need to know that sometimes the misbranding of drugs is also it's a very risky affair. And adulterated drugs are when there is a composition in the drugs which more than what is required, or certain composition which ought not to be there is there. So whenever we talk about misbranding of drugs and adulterated drugs or spurious drugs, these are not the same thing. There is a difference in there, and I would recommend you to go back and read unauthorized drugs also, they're imported in a name that's different. Like for example, like if I may pass off saline, the IV saline जो हम administer करते, if I kind of bring it down under the name of some other company, what do we do that? In IPR we call that passing off, right? As if it's your product when it's not yours. So when you look at all of these, the Drug and Cosmetic Act, the legislation per se also takes care. It also creates the provisions whereby you can approach to the authorities. So whenever we talk about manufacture also, it's not just about creating from a nothing, but it also means when you're altering, when you are finishing it, when you're packaging, when you're labeling. So manufacture of drugs, it's the same idea that we have of manufacturing food when we talk about the FSSA Act, right? So if you're studying food, so if you're studying Drug and Cosmetic Act, I recommend you to look into the Food Safety and Standards Authority Act as well. Please do that. That would give you a very clear understanding as to how these two legislations work parallelly with one another. And the COVID situation, we know that died because WHO, when the pandemic was introduced, when the pandemic was declared, what did the WHO say? First thing, eat nutritious food, drink a lot of water, right? That is what is important, and that is why Security Act also becomes important. That is why your FSSA Act also becomes important. Medical laws cannot be studied in isolation, but we need to study it on the basis of food and nutrition, on the basis of Food Security Act as well. Now, the administration of the acts and the rules also, under the drug acts, you have the advisory body, you have the analytical body of the executives also, because analysis is also to be done by the laboratories where, these laboratories are, earmarked by the government, and where the drug analyst also plays a very important role, right? So every state is supposed to have a drug control laboratory, because whenever there is a complaint of a certain branding of drug or adulterated drug, you have to file, you have to inform the state authorities, write a written complaint. There is a procedure that is being given there, and these drugs, before they're declared in public, a test has to be conducted. Because sometimes there could be complaints that may not be sustainable. There could be mistaken facts as well, but those are to be checked and analyzed by the authorities or by the persons who are being appointed by the state, right? Then there are executives. So the act also provides for executory functions like, controlling authorities. You have the drug inspectors, you have the licensing authorities as well. All right, so this is also very comprehensive legislation, and it also provides for punishments and penalties also, which we don't really have to dwell into it. So that also, again, you can have it. All right, so I think we can go on to the next. And before that, I'll just take a few questions that are here. Okay, yes, lung transplant, yes, Vipin sir, lung transplant is also included, because when you talk about the human transplantation, it doesn't confine itself only to liver, it doesn't confine itself to pancreas or the eye or the kidney. It also refers to any human organ that could be transplanted, because see, medical science is also in, developing so well, and stem cells, article hore stem cells is quite common, right? And we talk about, there might be a point in time where we can talk about where there could be more of organs that are also transplanted. So certainly, yes, lung transplant are also included. Does grandparents include maternal when we talk about grandparents, it doesn't, the law doesn't specifically say it's paternal or maternal, it says grandparents. So we take it for granted that grandparents would mean grandparents from both sides of our parents. Okay, speak in Hindi. I will try to speak in Hindi. Will it be retrospective also, or are you talking about in terms of transplantation of human organ? Whenever we talk about non-cognizable offenses, which so whenever we talk about an act which is an offense, criminal law, the retrospective effect doesn't have, right? Whether donation of blood and plasma in return of money is a punishable offense. I came to know that during current pandemic situation, plasma donors were demanding up to 1 lakh. When we talk about organ donations, blood and plasma would not come under organ donations, but we do have a law which talks about, blood donations. But sorry, it's not a law; it's a rule. It's an administrative rule that we have where, but the kind of situations that we are in right now, and whenever there is a lot, when the demand goes high, that means the supply is less. So in such kind of cases, Morally speaking also it is not correct, but yes, if a person is demanding 1 lakh for the donation of blood and plasma, and it is during this current, so the catchword here is the pandemic. It's a pandemic situation where things are thrown out of gear, so it is not a normal situation that we are in right now. So yes, it is not correct to be demanding 1 lakh for a blood donation or plasma donation. But the answer is, or sorry, the question is, who's going to bell the cat? Who is going to bell the cat? No matter how many laws we have, at the end of the day, if you need it, you need it. So how do we? I mean, that's the most practical thing that I can actually think of, right? If laws were to solve all issues that we have, social issues, they would have never existed in the first place. So when you talk about it, whether it is, whether it is a punishable offense, uh, it depends. It's on papers, it is not correct, but whether it is a punishable offense or not is something that I really can't give you an answer, because if I give you an answer based on the law, then the question is who will bell the cat, right? And yeah, we don't have a legislation, but we do have the rules. Then again, there's another question. It is a common thing that cosmetic products are being sold at general stores and they don't seem to possess any specific license for sale. No, when you talk about cosmetic products, if you talk about like a face cream, or you talk about anti-wrinkle creams like the L'Oreal, or Lakme, for that instance, these manufacturers, they have a license. And the people who are selling it in the general stores, they you are also licensed. Whenever you open up a store, you need to get a license from the state, that, and you need to list down that what is the kind of business that you're trying to get into. Is it a general store that, because then usme liability jo hota hai na, you can go back to your Donoghue versus Stephenson Contract Act, which clearly talks about the liability aspect of it. So if it is a cosmetic, which, and I'm just I'm just a person who's a retailer and who's just passing it out to the customers, then why would I need to have a special permission when it comes to selling cosmetic products? Because cosmetic products are not so that's the reason why we have Drug and Cosmetics Act, right? So cosmetics are to beautify or to use it, it's not for therapeutic purpose, right? But drugs are for therapeutic purpose, but cosmetics are not for therapeutic purpose. So we don't, but although you could be a shopkeeper, you need to have a license from the state. You need to inform the state that you are, you intend to sell product XYZ. All right. Now we come to Mental Health Care Act, which is very, very important and very relevant for the pandemic that's going on, because right now the challenge is not just physical or, the problems that are visible in the physical sense of the term, but we also have mental issues, and it's a very significant legislation, because this mental health care kind of repealed the old act that we had, which was passed way back in the 1920s, right? The Lunatic Act that we have, and this mental health is very, very significant, because today we don't allow to use words like insane person, or words like retarded, or words like lunatic for a person who suffers from mental illness. And on a personal note, I suppose that all of us at some point in time might have had a breakdown, and when I say breakdown, I don't intend to imply it's a depression or anything of that sort, but I think mental health is something that's very, very essential, because it is not visible to the eye. It may not be visible to the person sitting next to you, because it's there within you, and you need to have a sound mind for a sound body. And if you look at the definition of health, which was given by the WHO way back in the 1940s, what does it say? It says health is not just the absence of bodily infirmity, but of it should be mental, physical, social well-being as well. So it was recognized, mental health was recognized as a very important component of health, but it was only in 2017 that the Indian state took notice of, and we said that we need to have a law that is more um, applicable, that will take care of the rights of persons who are affected with who are inflicted with mental problems, right? And yes, and with the growing stress and speed being the new normal today, mental health is something that's very, very essential. So there was a time when you would study psychology, and people would make comments like, oh, why do you want to dwell into subjects of the mad people or lunatics, things like that. But they were so wrong, because mental health is really, really important. And so today we have a mental health legislation which was enacted in 2017, which kind of gives rights, it recognizes the rights of persons who suffer from some kind of mental illness as well, right? So if you look at this, I hope the slides are visible. It looks a little small to me. I don't know if we can enlarge this, but yeah, there are chapters, where specific provisions have been mentioned. And one very interesting aspect that I want to dwell with is your chapter number 3, which talks about advance directive. Like yesterday, I mentioned that, the healthcare, the advance or the living wills are not recognized in India. But for the purpose of mental health, it is recognized. And if you remember, living wills is what I tell you that, when a person suffers from a chronic disease and he knows that another 6 months or 8 months, his position is going to be so bad that he'll not be able to, make decisions on his own, and he may just have to be kept alive using a ventilator or some kind of medical techniques. That's exactly where, the directive, the living wills come into the picture, advanced health directives, and that is permitted for, under the Mental Health Care Act. All right. So for that, I will not dwell into all of this because I'm afraid we will run out of time, since we need to, discuss more. So please go read that, your mental health as well. But today we have a law that is to recognize, and this law is also to give, to extend right to persons who may not be able to take decisions on their own, or to persons who may suffer, from in some kind of a mental, issue. And at one point in time, because of this act today, if a person wants to take leave, from his workplace, पहले क्या होता था? It used to be only confined to physical, ailment or physical infirmity. But today, because of this Mental Health Care Act, you can even apply for leaves from your workplace, stating that, under there is a provision that allows you to seek medical, leaves even on grounds of mental health. So that's the importance that we attach, and it's very, very important given the times that we are living in today. So it's very important to connect and to be able to relate. Right? I think we can go to the next slide, please. So there's a one question from who are all authorized to decide to donate on behalf of, see, when we talk about brain dead persons, it is the first legal representative. If it is a minor, then it is going to be the parents. If it is an adult of 18 years and above, then it will also be the guardian if the person is not able to take a decision on their own. So that is where the surrogate, consent is going to come in, where your legal representative, your parents, in case if your parents are not alive, then who's the person who's been taking care of you? And that consent needs to be approved by the physician who's been treating the patient, and also by uh, two doctors who are appointed by the state. So it's not a very easy, affair to just give consent on behalf of a person who cannot make decisions on their own. And who is a person who can make a decision? If I can just make a reference to Section 11 of the Contract Act, competency to contract, competency to enter into a contract. That means if I give my consent, I should be a person who should be of sound mind. I should be a person who should be above the age of 18 years of age, right? So all of those, see, law we studied in different branches, but the principle of law are, quite uniform in its approach, okay? Yeah, we can go to the next slide, please. Yeah, so chapter 3 is on the health directives, which I want you all to go back and read. Chapter 5 talks about the rights of persons with mental illness. So we don't look at mental illness anymore as mental disability, but we look at it as mental illness, because just as we can have physical illnesses, even mentally also we could be suffering from several kinds of illnesses. And I think there are 26 types of illnesses that has been mentioned in the mental health care, for example, schizophrenia, epilepsy, and so on and so forth. Like even depression, for that matter, has been recognized. So there are 26 kinds of mental illnesses that has been listed in the Act. So there are certain rights that have also been recognized because the Mental Health Care Act takes a rights-based approach where we are not just talking about, whenever there is a right, there's a correlative duty. So if there is a person who suffers from mental illness, there are certain rights that he or she will also enjoy. And in order to ensure that the person with mental illness enjoy those rights, there is an obligation that is created on the states as well, or on the states. So there are provisions where every state is also supposed to have a medical facility in order, and if you look at the PHCs that we talked about yesterday also, necessarily there should be at least one psychiatrist and at least one counselor. But how much of that is met, we still don't know. Because this act is also quite comprehensive. It also lays down that there are supposed to be state authorities, there are supposed to be, for every district, there are supposed to be X number of psychiatric doctors, X number of, beds that should be there in the mental illness ward, and so on and so forth. So I remembered having visited in 2019, I visited one of the very big hospitals in semi-government hospital in the capital. And I was just having a talk with the a counselor who holds a degree in psychiatric social work, and it was quite interesting to know. And I could see that people, now we are quite open to the idea of visiting, doctors, to seeking help for mental illnesses. So it's very important to recognize their right, like they have the right to be rehabilitated. There have been, like, Tezpur in Assam, there is a hospital for persons with mental illness. In Agra also there is one, and the reason why I'm talking about these two is because, when we were kids, we would always talk about these two, and it was not in a very nice way that people would talk about it. But we do have hospitals, and the number of hospitals that are coming up are also increasing, which is a very good thing, because now there is an obligation that is created, that the act creates on the states also, to establish, psychiatric wards in the hospital as well. And they have every right, these patients also have every right to be rehabilitated. And and most importantly, they have the right to information, and also the right that their information also should be kept confidentially. They have the right to personal contacts and communications. They have also the right to access medical records. So just because a person suffers from mental illness, we cannot treat the person, as if the person doesn't exist. We need to treat the person with all humility, with all dignity, and with all human rights attached, right? So this is why this act is very, very significant. And so thankfully, because of this act also, today we have a number of uh, clinics, or a number of places where we can go and seek for, you go and seek help in terms of mental illnesses. So that's very important. So when we talk about the, the situations, the COVID situations, then that's perhaps when we will start talking about, the practical aspect of this legislation as well, right? So we can go to the next slide, please. The next slide, we're going to talk about insurance, because I think that is also very, very important when we talk about health laws in India, right? So I will not be talking about the technicalities of insurance, but the kind of insurance that is in a very generic form, which is available to people, which is available to us. And I have also the slides. I think the organizers can share it with all of you, whoever wants it. I have also kept some hyperlinks there where you can, just click, and you can also open documents which will give you a very clear idea of the kind of, guidelines that we have on, or by the IRDA, the regulatory authority on insurance, and also some documents which will give you a clearer idea of what we're talking about, licensing and pricing, and all of those other, information that could be relevant for you. All right. So yes, we can go to the next slide, please. So, the kind of insurance that we talk about in India, we have three kinds of health insurances, all right? We have the social kind of health insurance, we have private, and we have community-based. Just say yesterday, there were some questions regarding, companies. So whenever you talk about a company, that's selling you health insurance, that will come under the second type of insurance, which is private in nature. And these are, so most of the mediclaims that we talk about, these comes under your private, and these are commonly sold in the market, and there are lots of terms and conditions. And as persons of law, legal knowledge, it's wise that you read the terms and conditions very clearly. And these are, and generally क्या होता है ना, जब भी आप इंश्योरेंस के बारे में बात करते हो, ज़्यादातर प्रॉब्लम तभी अराइज होता है जब आपका मेडिक्लेम ना टेक्निकल ग्राउंड्स पे वो रिजेक्ट हो जाता है. एंड ये टेक्निकल ग्राउंड्स पे इस वजह से रिजेक्ट हो जाता है बिकॉज यू हैवंट रेड योर टर्म्स एंड कंडीशंस क्लियरली. एंड अगर आप इंश्योरेंस देखोगे इन टर्म्स ऑफ कॉन्ट्रैक्ट, इट्स अ कंटिंजेंट कॉन्ट्रैक्ट, राइट? तो जब आप मेडिक्लेम खरीदते हो, आप ठीक से ये देखेगा कि व्हाट आर द ऑफर्स दैट आर मेड टू यू, एंड व्हाट आर द एंड वन थिंग दैट यू नीड टू कीप इन माइंड इज दैट ये जो कंपनीज होते हैं ना, दे आर गोइंग टू sell you the mediclaim because these are term policies, right, on the basis of your age and your and your health status as well. So it's very important for us to keep a knowledge of all of that. And also, many times kya ho jata hai ki the knowledge of pre-existing conditions, or the high or the presence of complexities, or the prevalence of that my neighbor is doing it, so maybe I should also just sell it, or maybe I should also just buy it. That word of mouth also is something that creates a lot of issues whenever we talk about purchasing of mediclaims and term policies. So it's very, very important, because I really cannot go into what the companies would talk about their term policies, because then that's also a kind of subjective, and that is also quite not uniform, again, because every company will have their own interest, vested interest in that. And but what I can do is, and this document here that I've given it, you should just click on this and you'll get a hyperlink. This is a document that has been released by the IRDA, guidelines on health insurance, because the IRDA has also recognized mental health as mental illnesses as one of those, as one of the grounds where the health insurance policy can be extended. But but it hasn't, but it's kind of a very skeletal thing, and it's left to the companies, because ज़्यादातर जब आप insurance देखोगे ना, it's usually talking about in hospitalization, kind of a situation. So, but when you talk about persons with mental illness, when you go for counseling, or when you go for such kind of, you visit the psychiatric ward, you may not necessarily have to be hospitalized, or there may be ailments where you don't need to be hospitalized. For instance, you talk about diabetes, lifestyle, which are diseases which are uh, very, very dependent on our lifestyles. So for for hypertension, BP, one may not require to be hospitalized, right? So the question is, can they be covered under insurance or no? All of that is given to you in detail by this by the document, the hyperlink that I've attached here. All right. Now, when we talk about the social kind of insurances that we have in terms of health insurance, these are like, for instance, the central government health schemes, or the ESIS, the employment state insurance scheme, or the government has also floated a policy, or floated a social scheme of the RSBY, which is called the Rashtriya Swasthya Bima Yojana, which was launched by the Ministry of Labor, right? And today we also have the Ayushman Bharat, and we also, interestingly, have insurance ombudsman, but it's not really heard of. And when we talk about the CGHS or the ESIC, there has to be certain amount of certain, maybe a very nominal amount, but there are, or even for that matter, the Rashtriya Swasthya Bima Yojana, nominal amount of premium needs to be paid, right? And so these are the kinds of social health insurance that we, you know, uh, it's there, that's there. But to be under the CGHS, you need to be employee of the central government. To be under the ESIS, you need to be an employee of the state. So, and under the Ministry of Labor, there are certain, so every policy has certain conditions that needs to be fulfilled, right? So that's an example of social insurance. When we talk about community-based insurance, this is something on the lines of the cooperative banking that we have, which are for non-profit. So a group of persons come, so these members are themselves the participants, in the community-based programs, and these are, like, and it's based on solidarity as well. For example, when you talk about Seva, it's an organization that was started in 1992, and Seva stands for, self-employed women, and they started in Gujarat, and it's doing really well. So, they also have a scheme of, community-based health insurance. So whenever, so generally when we look at the insurances, we always look at insurance from the private insurance point of view, where a company is selling you a mediclaim and you purchase it, right? But it's not just confined to that. When we talk about health insurance, we do have three kinds, and we have the IRDA, who is the regulatory authority. So what it does is, it only gives you out regulations. And because, this, at the end of the day, when you talk about health insurance, private health insurances, when you purchase term policies and all of that, it's a, forgive me for saying this, but it's a business at the end of the day. And how and what offers are made to you depends on your needs and depends on your ability to pay the premium as well, right? So it's always wise that you read the terms and conditions very wisely, but to have a clear idea of, what are the kinds of illnesses, what are the kinds of health issues that are covered under the insurance, that ought to be covered under the insurance, is being given in the document that has been released by the IRT, right? So that's something we can do. Yeah, then we can just come down one more slide, and we will talk about the Pradhan Mantri Arogya Yojana and all of that. So please come down to the next slide. We are already at 1 o'clock, so I think Sunday afternoon you all must be also wanting to spend some family time. So yes, now that we talked about Ayushman Bharat, and it's very, very interesting to talk about, given the situations that we are, and thankfully the government of the day had been very wise and had been very you know, smart to actually come out with a policy, like with such a welfare policy and welfare scheme, as big as Ayushman Bharat, because in today, like we mentioned in the previous classes also, that we have the largest health insurance coverage in the world. So when we talk about Ayushman Bharat, it's a flagship which was launched by the government in 2009, and this is keeping in 2019, 2017, keeping in mind the uh, you know the sustainable development goals as well, right? That no one should be left behind when it comes to health uh, policies, and that is also the reason why we have to kind of build up on our primary healthcare centers, because if you remember uh, the Alma Ata declaration that we spoke about yesterday, which talks about health for all. And since primary healthcare centers are the first point of contact for most of us when it comes to healthcare services, it's really, really, really important. And when we talk about Ayushman Bharat also talks about revamping our primary healthcare centers. So there are two things which are very significant takeaway from, or significant factors under the Ayushman Bharat is also the health and the wellness centers, because it's not just about the healthcare, centers, not just about the hospitals and the primary health centers, but also wellness centers, right? And so when we talk about the wellness centers, I think the state of Kerala is doing really, really well in terms of healthcare model that they have, and that's something that we can beacon and maybe adopted, that can be adopted by the other states as well. When we talk about the PMJAY, the Pradhan Mantri Jan Arogya Yojana, also this is like this, the largest, biggest health schemes that we talk about today, where the beneficiaries are persons below poverty line, and where 5 lakh coverage is given to a family per year, right? And it's a cashless access that you can have to healthcare providers, and but one thing that comes to my mind is that when we talk about this, and this is a criticism that has been doing the rounds for quite a while, is that if we can divide, let's say we divide the society into 3 stages or into 3 categories of people. One of those persons who first group of persons who come below the poverty line, जिनके लिए ये प्रधानमंत्री जन आरोग्य योजना है. Then uske baad we have the creamy layer, people who do not need any kind of health insurance, or people do not need any kind of these facilities that are extended by the government because they are well to do. The 1% of the population in India who are running the economic, who has the economic powers in their hands, the big industrialists, for example, or those persons who don't need to kind of seek financial help should any kind of you know uh, uh, unfortunate incident befall on them. And in between are people like you and I, who are not in the below poverty line, who don't come within the bracket of those 1% population in the country. So salaried people like you and I, right? We The option that is available to us is either the social schemes of health insurance or the private, right? And most of us will go for the private medical, uh, you know, schemes, because not all of us are, employees of the state government or the central government. So then we don't have a choice, but we need to go for the private health insurance policies that are there. So what about us? Because we also form a huge percentage of the population. So the criticisms of the Pradhan Mantri Jan Arogya Yojana have also raised this question, that why is it that salaried people, have no choice than to go for the medical claims that are being sold to us by the private enterprises. And the IRDA is just a regulatory body. The IRDA, all that it does is it lays down policy guidelines and it gives it to the companies, and and the companies, of course, cannot be dictated that these are the terms of, these are the terms and conditions under which they can do. They can just give them guidelines. So where do we stand, right? So that is a question that has been left open, and the debate still continues to this day. All right. So these are some questions that you can ponder about, and maybe for students who are interested, you can dwell a little deeper and kind of carry out research and see, because when we talk about insurance legislations, due to lack of time, and also because our subject matter here is more on medical laws, so we can't really bring in insurance because that's more contractual, and that's so that would not be too fair to go away too far from the topic of discussion. All right, but that is a very interesting thing because you need to see for that. Yeah. So, and then, yeah, we can go to the next slide, please. And in the meantime, there's another question from Mr. Vipin. He says, in my friend's case, insurance, who are all authorized to decide to donate, who are all authorized for this, Mr. Vipin, you'll have to go through the act, because like I said, it's the relatives, the first list of relatives. If it's a minor, then it's the parents. If it is a grown-up person, then it would be the parents. If the parents are alive, if the parents are not alive, then perhaps the closest relative could be a sibling, could be a spouse, or could be even the children of the brain dead person, right? In my friend's case, insurance companies denied claim of bone marrow transplant. We were able to distinguish between implants, which was ineligible as per policy terms and conditions. We approached insurance ombudsman and company did not attend. Claim was, yeah, so it's an ex parte decision, right? That was given. And yeah, so the company, you see, it's like a business. The company is selling it to you. So the company will try to sell you. And, so these are, like I said, terms and conditions. But yes, how well do you, I mean, it also depends on what kind of claim that you purchased, what kind of terms, policy that you purchase. So it's on every, so like some companies would sell only a specific term policy. Some companies will give you an overall, which is more acceptable. Some companies may not include mental illnesses. All of these are subjected to their terms and conditions, right? After death of patient, insurance company denied claim. What is the remedy and forum to approach? If after the death of the patient, if the insurance company denied claim, then there is an ombudsman that you can go to. And in case if the ombudsman, and then you can also go to the consumer fora. And also, if that's not the case, then you can always approach the court as well. All right, so you have three options that are available. Yeah, so the next thing that I want to talk about is, do health laws in India need to be strengthened? And I purposely did not use the word that, why are the health laws in India weak? We do have laws which are, we do have adequate number of laws which are there for our healthcare systems. But when we look at instances that, you read in the newspaper every day, instances of vandalism in hospitals and in clinics, where you talk about the sale of drugs, adulterated drugs, misbranding of drugs, when we talk about product liabilities, when we talk about the universal healthcare systems, where a number of persons are still left out because of pragmatic issues. And I'll tell you some, and I'll give you some, examples that you can relate to, all right? When we talk about accessibility of medicines because of pricing, when we talk about accessibility of medicines, we also have to talk about generic drugs. We also have to talk about government supplies. Why many times, if I have the choice or whether to consume a generic drugs, or if I have the option to purchase it from a private company manufactured drugs, the chances of me purchasing from a recognized, from a well-established company, pharmaceutical company, is much higher than going and purchasing generic drugs. Why? Right? When we talk about countering health and medical exigencies, like the way, we're talking about global pandemic, right? You talk about that. We even talk about as small as, incidences as small, not small, but incidences at a smaller stage. I think, in 2018, there was a newspaper reporting where in Bihar, there was, because of an injection that was already, invalidated, which was being administered to, newborn babies, there was a number of deaths in the district hospital, right? When we talk about research and development, where are we lacking still, you know? And when we talk about food and nutrition, because health has direct connection, food and nutrition has a direct correlation to health. And when we talk about insurances, where are most of us still do not have insurance coverage, when we talk about healthcare policies, all right? So when we talk about vandalism in hospitals, when we talk about sale of drugs and product liabilities, the first thing that come to my mind is the case of Johnson and Johnson. If you remember the hit Transplant, 2019, there was a huge reporting where, Johnson and Johnson's were also made to recall a number of their products. And later on, they had to really try hard to build on their reputation again. When we talk about universal healthcare system, is universal healthcare, when we talk about healthcare system in India, is it really universal in its approach? Mhm. And then we talk about accessibility of medicines. The pricing of medicines is also important. It's not just about whether it's generic, whether it's not generic, but the availability of medicine is also important. COVID-19 situations, right now, what's happening is that, I think from the 17th of May, a vaccination for 18 years and above, 18 years and till 44 years. That bracket has been open, but many states, even in Delhi, for that instance, my own younger brother, who's in his mid 20s, he's not yet able to get a slot. Because one, our vaccination inadequate. Two, how are we actually going about with the availability of the vaccines, and then also another point that we can't lose out is the fact that many persons are registering themselves for vaccination, and slots are also being given to them, but they don't turn up for the vaccination. But on record, we have this many people who have been registered, this many people who have been given slots. Now, whether this person turns up on the allotted date or not, he or she is hampering the chance of the other person to be vaccinated. So how seriously do we take the facilities that the government opened to us is also a question that we need to ask ourselves, because it is very, very wrong to always put the blame on the other person, to always put the blame on the government and say that, state machineries are not able to, deliver. But sometimes we as, citizens, how well are we responsible for it? When we talk about food and nutrition, right? Scarcity of food, people are losing their livelihoods because of the pandemic. How are we going to tackle this? Because right now, it's not just the pandemic, but the repercussions that we will have to deal with, because there is a lot of food scarcity, not just that, malnutrition. And India doesn't do too well when it comes to malnutrition of children below 5 years. There's a lot of stunting, And so when we talk about food and nutrition, also, the health that we're talking about, the citizens, it's being compromised to a very large extent. Right now, all that we seem to see is about vaccination. All that we seem to see is COVID pandemic. But what we are losing sight of is also the repercussions that it's having on the food intake, on the nutritional requirement that we take. All right. So do we really need to further strengthened our laws in India? Because we have Food Security Act of 2013. We are encouraging a lot of research and development. But what is also important is about the budget allocation, and because I don't want to get into the politics of all of these legislations and, to get into the politics of all these, questions that pop up our mind every now and then, I will leave it to here and then we go to the next slide. All right. Yeah. So we can go to the next slide, please. So the question is, how safe are the health workers that we have in India, right? And why is it that we're not able to protect them the way we ought to protect them? Okay, so we will just see to that, and we will also try to find some solutions perhaps. Yes, can we go to the next slide, please? Yeah, so when you look at the when you look at the healthcare workers, are they safe or not? There has been a study that was being made by the erstwhile Indian Medical Association, and they came up with a report in 2017 which showed that 75% of the doctors faced some form of violence, while they were on duty, physical violence. And more than 99% of the nurses have also complained of verbal abuse or physical abuse as well. Like I said yesterday, the nurses who are always in close contact with the patients and the patient's family, they're mostly, at the receiving end of violence. So why are they so unsafe when, like I said, pandemic has made it all the more, so it can work in two ways. On one hand, there could be more people who want to get into the medical profession because it has brought to our knowledge today, it has made it inevitable that it's the doctors, and the other state officials, because we're talking about health law. So I'm going to talk about the doctors and the medical, the healthcare workers, who are the backbone of, the healthcare, the backbone of us all today, and on the other hand, there could be a number of people who want to, who may lose out on their interests to get into the, healthcare system, right? So what, so whenever, there is an attack on the doctors, and the reason why I'm saying, the reason why I want to deliberately pick on this is because there have been so many newspapers report, if you see, even in Delhi, even in Bangalore, you talk about in Tamil Nadu, you talk about in Punjab, you talk about in Uttar Pradesh, you talk about in West Bengal also. There have been so many instances where, because of the lack of oxygen cylinders, doctors have been beaten up. After, discharging your duties for 15, 16 hours, and you still get beaten up by relatives of these patients, that's really not a nice thing. to undergo, right? And the sad part of vandalism in hospitals in all of these areas is, in all of these places, is that most of the time these act of vandalism are committed by persons who may not even be remotely connected or related to the patients. There is a emergency ward care there, and this is something that happened in one of the government hospitals, which was related by an acquaintance. So she said that she had gone there for in the emergency ward with a relative of hers, and in the emergency ward for people like us, हमें क्या लगता है कि जो सबसे badly injured है सबसे पहले उनको attend करना चाहिए, but the doctors, they have their own ways of judging who should be the first that they should tackle with, right? So we will not get into that. And suddenly when the patient health deteriorated, one of the relatives of the patient started wailing and crying, and then some onlookers were there, because India, we have a huge population. So in front of the cinema theaters, in front of the hospitals, you will have people जो ऐरे गैरे ऐसे ही घूम रहे होते हैं. You do have people, and suddenly this person is wailing and crying, and these group of 5-6 people who were standing there didn't even know what the situation was, said, okay, oh, doctors are not doing their work, and started pelting stones. So when you talk about vandalism also, that's very, very important. But hospitals being a public place, what do? We can't really restrict entries also, right? But there are some suggestions that we will try to find today where perhaps we can protect our doctors. So the first thing is, whenever there is an attack on doctors, when doctors and healthcare workers, be it the ward boy, be it the nurses, be it the diagnostic centers, and so on and so forth, all of those persons who are in the healthcare sector, whenever there's an attack to them, to their property or to them in person, it shows the lack of trust and a very unhealthy doctor-patient relationship. So it's not just about revenging, it's not just about getting back to a doctor, but what it reflects is the lack of trust. And the doctor-patient relationship is based on trust. So it is very important that we as a state, we as citizens, counter these problems. Whenever we talk about vandalism, whenever we talk about attacks on healthcare workers, it also reflects medical negligence, right? Because there are instances where relatives of patients are outraged because of a case which is quite evident on the face of it that it's a case of medical negligence. The presence of unsatisfactory quality of medical services. So many times, assessment have also been made that vandalism is also the result of, the hospitals where there are no, where this establishment is deemed to be a hospital, but doesn't have the minimal requirement. And this again is because we don't take the clinical establishment act seriously. Because if you take this act seriously, and if the states adopt this act, then of course, the minimal standard of care, minimal standard of facilities will certainly be extended. And it'll be easy to distinguish whether the establishment is a clinic, whether the establishment is a diagnostic center, whether the establishment is a hospital. All right. Then we also talk about, lack of various hospital supplies. In today's time, well, I was talking to, like I said, if you talk to people whom who are in the healthcare sector and who have their own private nursing homes, in Delhi, since I am based in Delhi, the RT-PCR test was, initially it was for 2,400. Then it was brought down to 1,200. Then the Delhi government said, bring it down to 800. And now they charge a very minimal rate. Now, this is something that was very interesting that I found that, now the hospitals also, if you look at, are also, running cost to cost, because the healthcare, the pandemic has made it mandatory to use sanitizers, made it mandatory to wear gloves, made it mandatory to wear double mask, made it mandatory to use goggles, the PPE kit. And a PPE kit comes with a cost. It's not like the government is providing it for free of cost, because the government also need to procure it from some place, right? And now when the hospital, so supposing I have a private clinic, a private, even if it's a private clinic, right? And I'm, and I am, and the patients are visiting me. Now what happens is, and I have a clinic where the RT-PCR test is also being done. Now what the protocols say is that the WHO protocols say, if 10 people, let's say if 20 or let's say if there are, whenever people come in for the test, what happens is that you need to change your PPT also, because you can't be wearing the same PPT and, conducting the test on all these persons, especially when you're working in the hospital establishments, So how do you kind of, run your hospitals? One, you need to ensure that accessibility of health is possible by, you can't really just make huge charges on the patient, and on the other hand, you need to have your safety gears in place. So how do we kind of balance that? It's very, very difficult. So that is where the government needs to work out policies, and perhaps the government is also working out policies. There is a private medical hospital, and pardon me, I will not be taking the names, where for COVID uh, patients in October, November, December last year, 2020, the requirement was a deposit of 2 lakhs rupees. So private hospitals also today, the way they discharge the medical, you know, services is also almost like a prepaid, and but how do we blame them? Because they also need to run, their hospitals. They also need to pay the salaries, and there have been instances where patients have also not paid their, hospital beds charges, and they have left against doctors' advice. And what do you do to them? So it's very difficult. It's not as simple a solution, where you just have one size that fits all, right? So the expenses of healthcare services are sometimes expensive, which is why health and healthcare facilities can really not be as universal as we think of it to be, unless of course we are a state where we have good resources. And I'll tell you why the problem is. Then we also have lack of doctor-patient communication, because sometimes doctors are so overburdened with work. Like in government hospitals, when you go for an OPD, you will see that the lines are, the queue is so long that the doctor may not have the time to explain each and every ailment in detail, and that kind of makes the patient lose their temper, and relatives of the patients, because the doctor is not available, right? Not available to in a manner that they would want the doctor to be. And most importantly also is the absence of legislative laws which strictly imposes penalties, which strictly counters. You have your IPC, you have Prevention of Damage to Public Properties Act and all of that. But we need to have specific legislations that will ensure protection to healthcare workers, and that will also impose obligations, penalties, in a very strict sense on any person who goes against the law. And we do have a legislation that's in place today, but which is still very unheard of. And I will talk about that in the next slide. So, yeah, so when we talk about vandalism, also overcrowding of hospitals are also causes of, vandalism. And so we need to have more healthcare facilities. And the pandemic, if we don't learn the lesson from the current pandemic, then I don't think anything is going to teach us more than this, right? We need to have an improved system of hospital management. It's not just about hospital facilities, it's not just about the human resource, it's not just about the doctors, but it is also hospital management. There is a course also which is also offered by some universities, hospitality management, and that is also very, very important. Because when a patient, emergency situations, when you go, sometimes the receptionist is not there, sometimes you don't even know where are you supposed to go. So all of that goes in. So if you have a proper hospital management in place, that helps in a long way to curb the menace of vandalism and any kind of violence on the doctors, because unfortunately the doctors and the healthcare workers are usually at the receiving end of it. We need to also have an alarm system. Any kind of vandalism that breaks out, we need to be able to be we need to be able to recon and take the help of the police and the state agencies as soon as possible. So we need to have a kind of an emergency button that we should you know um, be able to press when the need arises. We need to have adequate number of staffs. We need to have a centralized medical record keeping system, which will improve the system of quality of administration. And we also need to have proper laws which will provide for imprisonment and, for compensation for any kind of damage that is caused to a hospital or to a doctor's clinic, or any kind of injury that is being inflicted on a doctor. So, we need to improve the administration of the hospitals. And at the same time, we can't lose sight of the fact that there has to be literacy, there has to be training, there has to be outreach programs that we conduct, where we need to educate the patients, where we need to educate, because, each of us are a patient. At some point in time, we need the help of a medical professional, so we need to educate people. And if you look at the consumer protection laws, there is also an obligation in the state to impart education on consumer protection laws. In the same way, we need to have a legislation whereby we mean, the health literacy needs to be improved, because we need to have people who are informed, we need to have patients who are informed, we need to remove this whole idea that doctors are demigods. They are human beings, but trained professions, and all that they do is they help us to they help us in reducing the pain that we go through by giving us, administering us drugs which is going to be suitable to counter the pain, to counter the infirmity that we have. But they don't have any kind of magical powers. So because in India, this whole concept of, demigod and a transcendental idea of, justice at times, and the larger than life, picture that we attach to doctors or to healthcare workers, that also needs to be diluted by making it more practical, by, making people understand that, when you go to a doctor, it is about risk, it is about the plus and minuses. It's not just about magic that, you expect, because many times what happens is that if a patient comes to the doctor, we expect magic remedies. That's not the case. We need to have a very, very pragmatic approach. All right. So that is what is very, very important. And that's the bottom line. You need to have a good healthcare system. At the same time, we need to have an informed citizenry, so that, the patient, so that, the patient doctor relationship based on trust is maintained in all sanctity. All right. We can go to the next slide, please. Yeah, so when we talk about the COVID-19 situations, these are some of the factors that comes up to my mind. The first thing, we knew that Disaster Management Act was invoked. Epidemic Diseases Act of 1897 has been also amended, whereby now any kind of attack on doctors or healthcare workers will be, the attackers will be subjected to punishments, which will be imprisonment or a fine of up to, imprisonment that can go up to 3 years, or fine, of 50,000 rupees, or with both. Right. So that is a very significant, that was made by through the presidential ordinance, which was made into an amendment act when the parliament met. Right. So the Epidemic Diseases Act today protects healthcare workers. And then we also had the Arogya Setu mobile applications, where we are trying to make contact tracing, and however, critiques have also come up saying that, you don't have data protection laws, and these are open interface and all of that technology, that makes people so vulnerable, and we're so open that our data are being shared on a common platform, and so on and so forth. But these are the steps that have been taken. So the very fact that you have your Arogya Setu mobile applications, which was made compulsory initially when the lockdown was announced, today it is not made compulsory anymore, because breach of privacy can happen, and we still don't have data protection laws. So in order to have, because we're moving towards e-governance, so in order to have such kind of, contact tracing or satellite tracing, or whatever term we may want to use, we need to have legislations in place like Data Protection Act, right? The bill. We need to have very strong legislations that, will help us to protect our privacy. At the same time, will also provide the state with the required information. Just last week, I was just listening to Dr. Swaminathan, who is the chief scientist in WHO. And one thing that she said, which really stayed with me, was that, when it comes to contact tracing, when it comes to dealing with situations like the pandemic, third world countries like India, one of the main problems that we have is with information sharing. Because whenever we talk about information sharing, if you look at magazines, also you look at the newspapers, also many times we say that there is underreporting. तो हमेशा एक डाउट रहता है दिमाग में कि यहाँ पे तो अगर हमने I was reading this magazine, so I really wouldn't tell you the name of this online magazine that I was reading, but they were reporting on the number of deaths that happened in a certain district, in a state, in one of the central India states, and jahan pe there was a panchayat election that happened, and after the panchayat election, the number of deaths that have gone up is really high, and yet people are not going there for tests. Yet people have not, the villagers have not gone for any kind of vaccination, because of the many theories that are attached with the vaccine, the plus, the minus sign, and everything else that's attached, all the arguments, scientific, unscientific arguments, and all of that. And they said that there was never a health representative who ever came to even educate them about the COVID-19 symptoms. Yet they said that yet the kind of symptoms that they relate to are all of those of COVID-19. So there are pockets of districts, or there are pockets of localities in our districts which have not even, where none of them have even gone for testing. So the information that we collect are also not adequate, and when we are sharing information also, these are not transparent. So it's very, very important that we have correct reporting of data, statistics, because that's how we go, that's how we're going to kind of gear up to come out with solutions as well, right? So we need to have, it's not just about having applications, it's not just about having logistics in place, but it's also about having adequate laws and also having adequate knowledge, and it's also about reaching out, where we can have appropriate data collection, and also make accessible data. That is also very, very important. And we also have these e-pharmacies that are coming up, and thankfully today we have the consumer protection law that is also taking care of consumers who purchase products online. We talk about Amazon, we talk about Flipkart, we talk about so many other websites that we have, where you can sit in the comfort of your home, and you can, just with the click of a button, you can order groceries and gadgets and even medicines for that matter. So we need to have regulations in place where we can where this e-commerce, where e-pharmacies can also reach to the deepest pockets. Now the shortcoming of all this is that the digital literacy in India is still very low. And though we talk about optical fiber and all of that digital India, but the thing is, how many people can afford smartphones? And even if people can afford smartphone, how many people can use it? I remember traveling in the month of March, where now I don't know what the situation is right now, but in airlines, if you don't do a web check, and if you go at the counter, you get charged for 400 rupees, extra 400 rupees. Now, so there was a kid, there was a child of about 14 years, and he told me that he was going home and he was staying in the boarding, and he did not know how to go about with it, but he had a smartphone. So I was helping him out, and then what caught my attention was that there was an old woman and an old man, who were also made to pay the 800 rupees because they couldn't web check. So when we talk about e-pharmacies, when we talk about these, mobile application apps, one, we need to have smartphones. Two, we need to have digital literacy. So if we don't have all of that, then this gets defeated again, because if e-pharmacies and these applications, mobile applications, are meant for people in the urban sector, I think we're already in a much better off positions, because in the urban sectors you have this multi super specialty clinics, you have the dispensaries, you have the pharmacies in almost every nook and corner. But when we talk about healthcare, we are also talking about people in the rural sectors. So in many of the districts, e-pharmacies still don't exist. There is no concept of delivery at doorstep yet, right? So these are things that we can actually ponder about. Then, we have the protection of medical service persons and Medicare service institutions, which is also called the Medical Protection Act. And 19 states, including West Bengal, has also adopted this and have also legislated laws where they're going to protect their medical healthcare workers. So see, this is the thing, when the states adopt it, so every state will have their own medical laws, medical protection laws. So we should also have a central legislative, central law which will protect the medical healthcare workers, which we also have in 2019. But I don't know how many of you have heard of this. So what is important is, if I can just move a little bit away and talk about the DK Basu's case, criminal law ke andar job karte, rights of arrested person. DK Basu case, Supreme Court said that, put it out in every police station, the rights of the arrested person. If the Supreme Court can give directions that, every arrested person also have a right, in the same way, hospitals should also very clearly put it out that, there is a law under which you can be punished, under which you will be punished with imprisonment and with fine if you commit any kind of physical assault on the doctor, and not just that, verbal assault as well. So it's important that we should have this kind of placards, we should have this kind of signboards where we clearly put it out in the public domain and educate people, because many people wouldn't know that there's a law which is there to protect healthcare workers. Even doctors, if I ask, if I was addressing a room full of doctors, I don't know how many doctors would actually know that there is a law that is there to protect them. So literacy is not just for the common people, but also for the professionals as well. And we need to have more of endorsements. We need to have more of advertisements, right? That is really, really important. Then, there is something called the liberalized pricing and accelerated national COVID-19 vaccination strategy, on the basis of which the government is today able to make vaccine accessible to all of us, to most of us rather, and free vaccination, because now there is 50% of the, so it's a PPP model where the government have signed an understanding with the manufacturers of these drugs, these vaccinations, where 50% of their manufactured drugs will be procured by the government, and the government will make it available to the citizenry, and the rest of the 50% they can sell it to the private companies, the distribution and sales and marketing companies, and the pricing would be, so there's a certain price that they can charge, but the lower limit is maintained, but the upper limit is not maintained. So that it's too early to criticize all of that, because for now it's working for us, because that's how the vaccine has been made available to us, because of this liberalized pricing and accelerated national COVID-19 vaccination strategy. It's a strategy that has been worked out, that 50% of the vaccines that are being manufactured will be procured by the government, and rest 50%, because see, at the end of the day, the manufacturing industries also need to earn their profit, right? Because they need to purchase their raw materials, they need to pay the salaries of their workmen as well. So that is kind of, so it's all in a, uh, how do we put it, throat to throat, or it's in like the minimal price that everyone is operating as of today. So yes, people say that it's a pharmaceutical in companies that are making the highest amount of profit, so be it, but they are actually catering to our needs, right? So we need to respect at least that much of uh, what is deserved by them. So data recording, reporting, and transparent sharing is really, really important. Underreporting is dangerous, right? Very, very dangerous. And so I don't know, I mean, I read this papers again, where it was written that the second wave is so bad, and the states, the hospitals have not been equipped because of underreporting in the first case, the first wave of COVID. So, well, I really don't have the empirical data where I can say that yes, it's true, but this is what has been said, that had the reporting of cases not being underreported, then perhaps the second wave would not have been as bad as what it is. And let's just pray that the third wave doesn't hit us, right? Because if that's going to be the case, then it's going to be really, really sad. And when we talk about food and nutritional security, it is also important that we that we need to join hands and come together, because and the only way that we can do is perhaps tackle corruption, and strengthen the government institutions by becoming more informed about our rights and also our duties. So if we come across situations where the midday meal scheme is not up to the mark, and if or the kind of the quality of food that is being served is not adequate, then we can always approach the state, because the state government at the end of the day is not an alien. They are also citizens who are just a part of our society, who are people like you and I. So that we can help them by reporting to them any kind of incidences which we know goes against public interest, right? Insurance. So it's a good idea that we be insured, but anyways, at the end of the day, what is also important is that you need to read the terms and conditions very clearly, because it should not be such that you purchase a term policy and then it doesn't work out for your purpose. So the takeaway, and the human resource management is very, very essential as well. And so the takeaway from what I've been trying to tell you this afternoon is that it's not just a one-sided affair, it's a two-sided affair where we need information. And the biggest challenge that India faces is that of population, because we have a huge population. We have a huge population, and so even no matter how many testing centers we set up, it's never going to be adequate. And we are a state where we are a land where religion, culture, tradition plays a very important role, and our idea to health and healthcare services is if not hugely, but religion, cultural practice, traditions, eating habits, food habits, they play a very, very important role. So it's important that we adopt a very scientific method of how we look at things. We need to have an outlook that is based on logical reasoning, and it's important to be spiritual, but we can't really dominate. We can't really allow ourselves to be swayed away by our religious belief to an extent that it could be harmful in the long run, not just for us but for the people around. Because whenever there is a person who's unwell, who's sick in the family, suffering from body infirmity, it's not just him who suffers but the entire family. So in the same way, what happens is when the group of people are citizens are unhealthy, be it children below the age of 5 years, or people who are above the age of 65 years, the country can never be progressive. And the bottom line is that we need to educate. Education is important. And what I really feel, perhaps because I'm a woman, is that we need to encourage women education all the more, because you educate a woman, you educate an entire generation. And if you look at malnutrition, if you look at healthcare facilities also, if you look at healthcare laws, or if you look at health as a subject, you will see that where a woman is at least educated up to class 10 or at least up to class 12, right, the incidences of malnutrition or the incidences of health being neglected is much, much lesser. This is why we are also pressing for institutional healthcare deliveries. We are also pushing for education of women, because it's important, because health begins not just when you are 50. It starts from the time that you were conceived in the womb of your mother, right? So it's very, very important. We have a huge population. We need to educate more. We need to educate the healthcare professionals of their rights and their liabilities. We also need to be educated. And the least that we can do is that we need to be legally aware, and we need to also be active participants whenever we talk about healthcare systems. And given the pandemic, it's important to reach out to one another, right? It's very, very important to communicate with one another, because isolation is the term that we're using. If a person is infected, isolate him. If a person is infected, isolate her. But isolation is what really tampers with the mental health. So it's very, very important to reach out, and it's important to find a hobby. It's important to find our little piece of heaven in our heads, because that's where all the thinking process starts, and that is where the actual healthcare starts. Because a healthy mind in a healthy body, or a healthy body with a healthy mind, right? So yes, I think with that I can wind up my session, and if there are questions I can take. I don't see any questions in the chat box, so I guess over to you, Shalini. I think I mean, that was all that I could talk about. Of course, we will hope that there are more of public-private partnerships when it comes to healthcare services. And yes, we have an obligation in the Sustainable Development Goals: gender equality, healthcare services, infrastructures, 17 sustainable goals that we have. It is a point of reference for each of us, right? So we need to do that. Okay, there's one question that has come. I'll just take that, and maybe, do mohalla clinics also fall under the act and as primary healthcare centers? Yes, when we talk about Delhi, which comes under the Clinical Act because it's a union territory, mohalla clinics, I suppose you mean the, say, the the clinics in the at the localities, those small clinics under the act and as primary healthcare centers. Yes, primary healthcare centers will always have the minimal standards of care and facilities that they are required. They are supposed to have it on papers. Where when it comes to mohalla clinics, like I said, they're supposed to have and be registered under the Clinical Establishments Act. But like I said, there is the transparency aspect of reporting and registration and maintaining of records are not very transparent in India. So I really can't vouch whether the mohalla clinics are registered, but yes, they are supposed to have. They are supposed to be registered because there is a legislation which mandates any kind of clinical establishment, clinic, any kind of healthcare facility, where services are rendered, they have to be. Yes. Okay, thank you so much. Yeah. Thank you all. Yeah, I think Shalini can take over from here.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for taking this session. It's so lovely that you take all these lectures. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you so much. I wish you all good health, and it's been my honor to be able to share my thoughts and ideas. And I would also want to apologize if there's anything that I said which is not very acceptable or it doesn't match up to your expectations. So I do wish you all a very good health, and I hope you all come out of this pandemic alive, and perhaps we'll all meet someday physically also. No, I think that's something we all can look forward to. And yes, my phone number and my email ID is there with the organizers. If any person would want to have a word with me or to send me an email, you are more than welcome to do that. I'll be very happy to attend to your calls and your messages. If not instantly, certainly I'll get back to you all. So thank you so much to the organizers, and to all of you. You have been a wonderful group of participants. So thank you all so much. Have a lovely afternoon, and please take care of yourselves and your loved ones. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, ma'am.